Hello and welcome to Profiles in Risk. This is your host, your overly caffeinated host, Tony Cañas. And today I have a really cool episode. Some of my favorite episodes are author episodes. And when we originally created Profiles in Risk 7 years ago or so, 700 episodes ago or so, the original idea was to have carrier side leaders come on the podcast. And for whatever reason, that did not work out. There has been exactly one carrier CEO in the past, and that was Mike Bork from Memic. Today, we have the second one. We have Marc Adee, like the word 80, like the number 80, Marc Adee, CEO at Crum Forster, and the reason we're chatting today, author of the book, the Once and Future C&F. Marc, thank you so much for joining me today. How's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
My absolute pleasure. When your people reached out about the book, they probably were surprised that they got a reply in roughly 2.2 seconds, because basically author interviews are some of my favorites, and then a book written by a carrier CEO about that carrier is just going to be interesting. So, and the opportunity to discuss the book with that carrier CEO was something I had to jump in on. So they sent me a copy, and then I got through it pretty quickly. It's a pretty easy read, and I have a significant number of highlights to guide us through this conversation. But I would love to start with why write this book? What you were already at the top of the chain in the company. So why write this book, and write it for wide consumption, not just for internal, for your own people?
It was interesting. So we turned 200 years old back in 2022, and Crum Forster, who runs Fairfax, said, what would be cool is if we had a book that kind of went through the 200 years. And I was like, that would be cool. And then I realized he thought it'd be a good idea for me to figure out how to do it. And so I started with a bunch of questions that I always had about Crum Forster, like why did these guys start it? Why did the Crum Forster come along? And you start with kind of those, and so the researching of it was a lot of fun, and we had a lot of like ancient documents and stuff like that, and so it was fun. And then maybe a year into it, he was like, when do you think you're going to write this thing? Because I was having a lot more fun researching it than writing it. But it happened that my daughters went off to college about that time, so I had a window of time, and I got down to writing it, and it is actually kind of fun to write a book, and it's as you could maybe appreciate, it's kind of written to the next generation. In a way that I thought would be helpful, so that people coming up today don't necessarily have to live through some of the things that we did that didn't work out so hot in the history, right?
Makes perfect sense. And during the very intro, in the letter from the CEO section, you talk about the C&F story is that of a once great company that lost its way and was given another chance or two. I was very impressed that you were honest about that from the very beginning, because the corporate defense system, the corporate, especially insurance, is so risk averse. The corporate thing would have been to sweep under the rug the lost its way part and tell us a rosy story that was not quite accurate. And that's not at all what you do. You give a great history and a super interesting history, and you talk in significant detail about the bad years.
And there were plenty of bad years, right? So, but I think the part that's interesting, and I think you're absolutely right about the kind of the corporate edit, but the Crum's history really reflects like everybody's history. That we were very representative of companies throughout that 200 years, right? And so you could say, oh, we dodged all that, and not a lot. I mean, I did research on this too, and there might have been one or two that dodged it, but most companies that were writing the kind of business we were writing came upon much the same kind of problems, and whether they survived or not, has a lot to do with factors that had not a lot to do with whether they were right there alongside Crum. I think I make that point at some point in the book where it's like, oh, so and so didn't possibly have this problem. I'm like, oh yeah, they did.
Uh, they just didn't have a CEO willing to write a book about it.
Yeah, they didn't write a book about it, right? So
Yeah, I really appreciate that honesty, and that honesty is there throughout the book, which makes it a fantastic learning experience, both for current insurance leaders and future insurance leaders, which it sounds like what was a lot of who you were thinking about when you wrote it. The introduction, the title is Cost of Goods Sold Unknown. That is one of my favorite things about insurance. And when I'm telling people about insurance and insurance careers, I always start with, I dare you to find another industry that doesn't know the cost of goods sold when we sell it, right? And Buffett digs deeply into this in the Buffett letter, especially the early ones, especially with how long-tail commercial lines is. So yeah, you immediately grabbed my attention. Corporate, and I enjoy corporate histories because I'm a giant nerd, and especially insurance because we don't get enough of them. And I own copies of about all the ones that I've been able to get my hands on. I have the two Nationwide books, Farmer from Myrna about State Farm, the USAA one, which is this big, and I have not been able to get through it. I have a bunch. Those are the ones that come to mind right now, but I have a bunch of them.
yeah, you can see right over here, I have like tons of them on my shelf. And so, but some of them actually my angle there. It's like I have a pile and they're very similar, but it's some of them are like unreadable. And so that was one of my challenges.
Exactly.
Even The Farmer from Myrna, which Warren Buffett does recommend, you're like, really? Like, I don't know, this one doesn't seem like that readable. But I realized that to make it readable was part of the challenge, right? You could put everything you know in a book and it doesn't make it better, right?
And I want to give you so much credit for that. My first book, and thus far only, I'm working on the second. The first book, it's called Insuring Tomorrow. It's about how to engage millennials in the insurance industry, and it came out in 2018. And my girlfriend was the editor of it, and she was a quiet. She was not listed in the book. She didn't want to be listed, but she kept telling me throughout the process, nobody wants to because I kept saying this is the first thing that insurance nurse is ever charging for, $19, but still, I need this to be a real book. It can't be a ebook, even if it's in printed format. It has to be a real business book, and so I wanted longer. And she kept saying nobody wants to read a long book, right? And I enjoy long books. So she ended up winning that discussion, and the book went out at just over 200 pages. And the very first review that came in, I sent it out. The very first review that came in, like 10 hours after I sent it out, was a former president of the CPC Society that I had met through CPCU, and he started the review with I read the book in a single sitting on a flight to London to go to Lloyd's, and then he talks about how good it was, and that's when I understood that truly long is not important. Easy to read is important, especially if you're trying to reach the next generation.
And I think that's exactly
and
it.
you
Like,
succeeded in that.
nobody wants to read like a 400-page blow by blow of everything that happened. And that was important. Like, what are the themes I was trying to break out? And you hit one, right out of the gate. For a lot of people, and if you remember, well, you probably remember because you probably weren't reading investment books in like the 80s or whatever. But if you went back and looked in the 80s, there were a lot of these books, and they were written, they're kind of like Liar's Poker, but maybe a little more technical about people who had done interesting things in the investment or the trading or that kind of sphere. And it kind of energized a generation of young people like, oh, I need to go and do what they're doing in Liar's Poker. I mean, frankly, I think he wrote Liar's Poker so that you wouldn't want to do it, but it had like the opposite effect. But here, I think, one of my points for young people or people thinking about careers is insurance is like endlessly fascinating, right? And there's
Endlessly.
so many
Absolutely.
ways to get it wrong. And it's because you don't fundamentally like understand. Um, and I also think like when young people are thinking about careers, you have the idea that you're going to hit it rich like in the first 10 minutes and then you're going to retire to your yacht or whatever. But when reality sets in, you really want a career that kind of keeps pace with your learning and experience and just keeps going and going and going. And insurance has that. And so I was trying to give some impression of that, um, in the book, that you can have this kind of long and rich career, if you think about it, right?
Uh, yes. I happened to be at Liberty at the small office in Duluth, Georgia, when Skip, and I can't remember Skip's last name, celebrated his 50th year at Liberty and then retired a few months later. I have ran into so many people in my insurance travels, especially with how many conferences I do, who have been in this industry for 30, 40 years, who love it and who have had incredibly interesting and profitable careers. And with InsurTech, it's only getting better. So I 1,000% agree. And we suck. That's what my book is about, the engaging millennials. We are really bad at, as an industry, at attracting that early talent and at helping that early talent grow out of the call center or out of entry-level claims or entry-level sales. Once they hit that second level, they tend to stay forever. That's why I push CPCU, because once you get CPCU, you become more valuable in insurance than outside of insurance, and you'll grow. So I completely agree with everything you're saying career-wise.
Yeah, and so I think that's where if you can get people to kind of get hooked, oh, and I always say like it's a great on that front. Like nobody goes to high school or graduates from high school saying I want to get insurance, right? And so that people walking out of college, they're all kind of in the same boat. They're all going to have to learn. And the beauty of CPCU or the actuarial profession or any of the other facets is they're all self-study. It's on you. It's how much effort you want to put in, and you can keep learning and moving your whole career. And and so I think where we do not do a great job as an industry is everybody's a little apologetic for, oh, insurance, blah, blah, whatever. I'm like, insurance is not, or I put it more positively, insurance is a lot more interesting than banking, right?
Oh my God, a
And
lot
so,
more than just about any other industry.
yeah. And so you say, well, what is it about banking that you think is going to be so exciting that we're not doing? And and it comes from that somehow in the popular imagination, investment banking or whatever is exciting. You're like, well, I'll disagree, but I think we end up being a little apologetic.
And in the popular imagination, insurance is Ned Ryerson from Groundhog Day.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
there are reasons or like yeah, no, like all of the stereotypes. Anytime insurance gets mentioned in a movie, it is in a negative way,
Right.
and it's so unfair.
Yeah. And
Uh,
so I think when you read this, you read about these people who had very interesting lives and careers and had kind of all these dimensions that you wouldn't think about, right?
Absolutely. The title, Once and Future. Okay, so
Yeah.
I am enough of a nerd to have caught that title evokes Arthurian legend.
Yes.
Uh, so I don't think you mentioned it in the book, but why Once and Future? What is the message you were trying to send with that book title?
I really like that book, right? The Once and Future King, which is probably officially targeted to eighth graders or whatever. But it's one of those books that if you read it at different points in your life, it's a pretty interesting book on a bunch of different levels. But again, it's that idea that that you can have you can have this kind of peak and then it drops away, but you can come back, right? And I think the idea with King Arthur is that some people are still waiting for him to show up, which is interesting. But I kind of like that book, and I have a collection of I do a weekly note to all my employees that I started the first week of COVID, and I call that C&F in the time of COVID, which is another kind of name that I've copped off a more famous book. But so this is kind of consistent with that. But again, one of the things I say to my guys is, the best chapter is being written right now, right? And so I'll do a new edit, a new edition 10 years from now. And the things that my people are doing now that are exciting, they can see what the bar is. Like, what are you going to do in the next 10 years that's going to get you in that version of the book? And then that's kind of the future, right? So I think that's the exciting part.
That is fantastic. The founding story is super interesting and very, very well told. The whole, we're going to be a different insurance company because we will inspect the buildings piece. Very, very, very interesting. I did not know that was not like a common thing back then, but we're talking like a long time ago, right?
That's when New York had 100,000 people living. It's hard to picture like how that's even possible. And one of the mysteries with the founding is, we have this picture of Captain Wiley, and he's there in the book, and he looks kind of stiff, right? He's like the military outfit. And you really could have just written him off as being kind of a historical, whatever. And then you read about him, and the guy was like amazing, right? He like lived in the woods, for a couple decades in his youth and was fighting, hand to hand. He seemed like he was a very interesting guy, and you wouldn't have gotten that out of any of the corporate histories of Crum. They just, and Captain Wiley formed this company, right? So they didn't go back and find out what he was doing when he was 18. Very interesting guy, and had kind of this super interesting life, before he came to start, North River.
I thought you did an absolutely awesome job in helping us understand the historical background without and as an actuary by trade, you like the research, right? The temptation to write 500 pages of context was probably there, but you did a fantastic job of giving us the historical context that all this was going in around without making it a hard to read book. I love the part, page 16. In 1822, there were only 9 insurance companies operating in New York City. Regulations at the time had a protectionist bent. Foreign companies were not allowed to operate in New York, and out-of-state companies were taxed heavily for the privilege of doing so. Number one, it really helps us understand the context, but also that is like today, it's a different regulatory environment, but the reality of insurance today continues to be this heavily regulated industry. So learning how it was back then and how Crum and Foster adapted around those regulations and how it affected the very interesting legal setup of the different companies that eventually come together to be what is Crum today was beyond fascinating.
but it's kind of a nutty structure, right? When you read it, you're like, what? Like, how did that even work? And yet you see vestiges of that showing again now. Like people are kind of coming up with a structure that's very similar to that now. And you're like, it didn't work out that hot in the old days. Maybe you can solve for it. But you do see companies with that idea that you could kind of bifurcate the capital and the underwriting, and you're like, I don't know, maybe.
Um, I'm a former underwriter. I did 1 year at Nationwide Ag in small commercial, and I did 2 years later on. So I was sales manager and other things in between. But my last 2 years as a carrier employee, I was middle market at Liberty. And I chatted with a lot of underwriters and underwriting leaders over the years. And this idea, so page 20, the issue with striving for underwriting perfection in a competitive environment is that it can stunt a company's growth prospects. And then you talk about it, and we see how that affected, right? How over the years they opened up the appetite, and then they got in trouble, and they dig them, and how they dig themselves out. It is yeah, no, for any underwriter or aspiring underwriter, if such a thing exists, like they should be reading this at every underwriting training program in the country, and
That's
at
kind
every
of
underwriting program in the country.
I feel it should be on the actuarial side disagreed with me, but I think it should be on their syllabus. And my dedication in the beginning, I tell people if you read it and you get the joke, then you're going to want to read the book, right? I say if you read it and you don't get the joke, you should probably read the book a couple times.
I love that. Absolutely love that. The adventures in ENS and the excess and surplus side are very, very, very interesting. If I'm not mistaken, today Crum itself is admitted, right?
We have both sides. So
Oh, okay, okay.
the nice thing about being 200 years old is there's not a lot of things we can't do in the US at least, right? So we have both.
Fantastic.
But we were probably one of the first in the original conception, right? And so that's the other thing about being 200 years old is you probably see a lot of firsts, over that period.
The transition, and I think you do a fantastic job of telling a lot of the important transitions in leadership and in company structure before your time. So those are based on research, but the transition to the current ownership to Fairfax, super interesting. So I was familiar with Fairfax and with a lot of the Fairfax companies, but I had never read deeply any of the corporate histories. I don't know if any of the other Fairfax companies or Fairfax itself have publicly available corporate histories. But the transition to Fairfax was absolutely fascinating, especially because you were there.
Yeah. And so that part is I think there is a 25th anniversary. I'll see if I can find the PDF. I'll send it to you. There's a 25th anniversary Fairfax description, but this year, the last year was 40 years they came up on, and the last 15 have been wildly successful, right? So the Fairfax story is super interesting, independent of Crum, and so I had a little bit of that, but it was back to them buying these companies that were a little beat up. But when you buy something you think might be a little beat up, as they found out, and Xerox before them, that a little beat up might be a lot more beat up than you were anticipating, and then you need a certain kind of group to fix that, right? So fixing is a little different, skill set than growing, and that's the other thing. Like as you're talking to your base of of people. Fixing companies is fascinating. Like I always tell people, like raise your hand for the crappy jobs, right? Like everybody wants the good jobs. But when I went in to start Fairmont, which I talk about a little bit in there, that was like a super interesting moment of pulling together a lot of pieces that didn't necessarily have to work out. And then Fairfax had airdropped me into other places along the way. And you learn so much in a hurry in those kind of crisis situations. And so I always tell my young people, if there's a disaster, you should raise your hand to go fix it. And you know, obviously you have to be ready for it when it comes away. But
turnarounds in general are hard. Turnarounds in insurance are particularly hard because you might have stuff on the books that is going to, unless you do something about it, is going to be there for, right, that asbestos, right? We're talking like 50 years, and it's still a problem that we have to deal with.
Well, and that's where like Jay Brown, who I talk about, who Xerox brought in to get them out. He was a fascinating guy and super smart and had done all these kind of interesting things, but that reorganization plan had so many moving parts. It was so complicated. And so I was there doing part of that too. And even just watching somebody like that is incredibly valuable. And you're just like, wow, that is like some super complicated thinking, and then he executed on it, right? And so when we did some of the other changes that we did over the years, like same kind of thing. You have kind of the bold plan, and then you have to be able to execute it. I mean, I think a lot of people discount that in when they think about insurance, what insurance people do, right? It's you got a lot of moving parts, and it's super interesting, right? And so yeah. So and that's what I try to get across in the book too, right?
The Xerox chapter might be one of my favorite parts of the book, and it opens with this wonderful paragraph. Xerox, the accidental savior. Like lion taming, running an insurance company requires that you respect the particular animal that you're working with. Both have some hair on them and both bite. There are definite benefits for those who take the time to deeply understand the nature of the beast. If you're not paying attention, you'll probably get eaten alive. It's so good and such an interesting chapter. And I love, because I'm a nerd about our industry's history. I know, even though it's from before my time, that Sears, Allstate, right, and there's a few others like random companies that have nothing to do with insurance that either owned or created insurance companies, and basically none of them, or very rarely, do they ever actually stick around forever, right? Even GE just spun off electric insurance companies.
Yeah.
So yes, Xerox coming in thinking that this insurance company is going to be a great buy, getting in deep trouble, and then saving is a fantastic story.
It's a wild story, and it's so, the time, it was just a different time, and different kind of management, and so people were starting these conglomerates, and yeah, why not throw an insurance company in there? And yeah, you just wonder how long it took them to have that sinking feeling that they had bought something that they didn't want. And but yeah, that chapter but again, like you wonder if you're me running the company, like, well, why didn't Xerox buy it? Like, how did that make any sense? And you can dig through and find those answers. And there were not that many Xerox people still running around who you could talk to directly about it, right? But I did find Jay Brown, and he gave me some color on his view of how it all went down, right? So it's fun.
For the younger listeners, and I do have to do this on the podcast often. For the younger listeners, Xerox made photocopiers. And they had become a gigantic technology company. And depending on their age, you will find people who still call any photocopier a Xerox machine. And they were radically important in offices well into, I mean, probably today, but less so than before. So just a little background on Xerox for Gen Zers and younger millennials that might not have an idea what the heck why Xerox was an important company.
Yeah.
There's a section, the same chapter, page 55, where you talk about GE and how GE is packed with black belts and green belts, Six Sigma, and they were like the proverbial man with the hammer. Everything looked like a nail. And heaven help anyone who questioned the wisdom of the GE approach. Having read Jack Welch's first book, which I can't remember the title, and having been a fan of him for a long time, and I've kind of moved on from there. But that made me laugh really hard. And I've ran into a lot of green belts and black belts at insurance companies. And the biggest thing is, I'm a fellow MBA. I understand. I'm not a numbers person, but I do have my MBA. I understand the obsession with numbers, especially in financial services. But I'm a big believer that true leadership combines numbers with psychology and with people leadership. And later in the book, you display just fantastic people leadership. So I love that comparison between the hammer that GE brings in, where all they care about is the spreadsheet and Six Sigma, versus the great people leadership you display later.
It goes without saying that I was that person that asked that question, but or that didn't quite get the Six Sigma or I think I am a green belt or something like that. But the book you should read is Lights Out. If you're looking for a GE book that takes it from when Jack Welch left modern times, it's called Lights Out, and
okay.
It filled in a lot of gaps for me that I suspected were the case. But
does it get all the way to delisting from the stock market last year or early this year?
No, it ends. It really kind of takes you through Jeff Immelt, his kind of, so it kind of picks up after Jack Welch.
Perfect. I will totally
the guy right after Immelt, maybe
totally jump on that suggestion.
Yeah,
thank you. Let's see. I mean, I keep fast forwarding or like pushing.
One that I think you missed on. I was funny. One of my guys here who read it, and I would point out is he said it was page 50. Oh, page 50. Yeah, like one of the things that, and again, if somebody wanted to get a feeling for turnarounds, right? Like I kind of put you in the action as a Xerox person facing a turnaround situation. And one of my guys here was like, that page really stuck with me because I felt like I was right there, faced with all the kind of issues that the Xerox guys had at that time.
I would agree with that, absolutely. We already talked a little bit about the Fairfax acquisition, and you did such a good job of telling us about that experience. In page 65, how do you weigh the legacy of any management team? While the numbers speak for themselves, your legacy exists in the minds of the next generation. Can't tell you how much I love that. It reminded, I'm a big Hamilton fanatic, the play Hamilton, seen it several times. And there's a line in Hamilton towards the end when he gets shot. Hopefully that's not a spoiler for anybody, given that this happened long ago and the play's been around for like 15 years or 10 years. So there's a line in there where he says legacy. What is a legacy? Legacies. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but legacy is planting a garden you'll never see. And you bring that really well into the business world. And I would say that what it said to me is, yes, the numbers matter, and especially in insurance and financial services, the numbers matter. And the numbers are what will make the Wall Street Journal tomorrow. And you have to manage that. But Jack Welch had great numbers, right? Manager of the century, whatever he was called. Do the people that worked at GE while Neutron Jack had his way with GE remember him that way today? Do the people who cared about GE and invested their lives working at GE care about him that way after GE has delisted from the stock market, right? Yeah. Like how like beyond the numbers, how the next generation will remember you.
It's the next generation and the next generation, right? So I think it's culture is what has to carry a company through longer periods of time, right? And most people might be able to say, oh, I can see what would happen if I got hit by a bus tomorrow. But to your people who are just showing up, do they get it? Are they kind of aligned? And then are they going to be ready when the time comes to run a division or run the company, right? And it's some of that is the culture, some of it's the experience, some of it's the training, but I think a lot of people overly focus on the numbers, and insurance is a numbers business, but it's a people business too. And I think a lot of times people, again, this is another one of those common misperceptions about, oh, it's all about the numbers and everybody has to be an actuary. And you're like, I don't think that's true. If I happen to be an actuary, that's worked out well. But some of the most important things are the people part of it. And some of that's your external relationships and networking. Some of it's you're developing your talent in a way that really is aligned with this kind of long-term career path that you can have in insurance if you have people looking out for
you. The chapter on Crum Forster Now, chapter 6, C&F Now, is fantastic. If somebody calls Chat with Tony tomorrow and asks, hey, what about Crum Forster? I will happily tell them, this sounds like a fantastic company. And by the way, go read the book. It might seem uncharacteristic for an actuary to start with culture, but Fairfax is all about culture. You can't have a great company without great people. And then you talk a good amount about the culture and how you built it pre-COVID, post-COVID. And I think that there are so many lessons for current and future leaders. I'll be honest, having met many actuaries, because I over time have gone to a lot of actuarial conferences as a vendor of recruiting services, etc. And there's a few that I become friends with, but they're uncommon. An actuary with a focus on culture is really awesome, and especially because your actuarial brain is really good at digesting this into a logical way to think through it.
I think even actuaries, I think there are more and more that are really thinking about the whole career arc, right? And so really we've got a lot of people from all sorts of different places, but a lot of the actuaries, when they see, hey, I could do what he did, I could get out there and really be involved in the business, that looks like more fun. And you always have that actuarial thing in the back pocket that you can run the numbers if you have to. I could look at development factors if I wanted to.
So for the listeners, the book ends up coming in at about 82 pages. something like 85 in the printed version, but it's about there's about 82 pages of like to the last page of actual text before uh yeah, it's about before the appendix type of thing.
Yeah.
Uh it's a quick read. It really is. I think I read it in about 2 or 3 sittings, mostly on airplanes, and I loved it so much that I went out of my way to message you and tell you, hey, I really enjoyed it. Really, really enjoyed it. Looking forward to share this with the rest of the industry and the world. So thank you so much for writing it. Um, what if you could give one piece of advice to new CEO entering the insurance space today, whether they come from insurance or not? What would the advice be?
First, they should read my book, but I think it goes into that, and again, I think it came out in a lot of the segments, right? If you get into insurance, without really knowing how to spell insurance,
Which
you know,
happened?
my joke there is the next word you're going to learn how to spell is loss development, right? And so so I feel, it's back to that, you really have to understand the creature you're dealing with. And I think that's like it's like an appreciation of the business that you have to have. And it has to, for CEOs especially, and I tell this to younger people because now's the time to start developing it, is you want to understand the different products. So you need to have breadth, you need some depth, right? You can't have people around you talking about numbers that you don't understand. And so they're functional skill sets you have to have. You have to surround yourself with really good people, and that isn't always the case. But I think it's that deep appreciation. You got to kind of love this business to be in this business, right? And especially with this job, and people around you will they can smell fear or lack of confidence. So so I think you start building that base, with your first job, right? And then kind of to your insurance nerd concept, if you run the clock, I'm guessing about 20 years from where you're at, this is where you end up, right? And so I feel like that would be my piece of advice, is that if you don't appreciate it, you probably shouldn't take that job. If you've taken the job, hopefully you've developed that appreciation for the business by then.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Um, what did you learn about yourself as a leader writing the book?
I the biggest thing, it's hard to write about yourself, right? Like that might have been the hardest chapter. I'm like, this chapter is boring because I already know the answer, and I so you'll know, like, that's, I think, one of the shorter chapters. And I think writing does help you crystallize your thinking on a lot of things, right? And so the other I mean, big lesson that people could take out of this, has to do with riding market cycles, right? And so if you looked at Crum, for example, um, they kind of were in the penalty box through 2 hard markets where all these other companies were taking off. And so, like, understanding where you are in the cycle and not hitting the gas during a soft market, or actually understanding that the hard market is the time to hit the gas. Really playing those cycles is super important. But you also can see, like, how delusional, people can get, like, during those cycles. And so, the most fascinating thing is I would ask people at dinner conversations, like, what do you think the combined ratio was for the industry for the 20 years from 1960 to 1980? And they're like, I don't know, 98, whatever. Right? The real answer is like 250. Only 2 people ever got that answer right. Um, and and then it took 20 years to figure that out, that was the case, and then 20 years to forget that nobody knows that. And so it goes back to that appreciation of the business, right?
One last question, and then we'll both have meetings, I'm sure, at the top of the hour. What do you hope your legacy at Crum Forster will be 50 years from now?
50 years, I hope people remember what I did and kind of take it forward in a way that's been adapted for the world 50 years from now, right? So that I would like to think that 50 years is interesting because, right, our next CEO or two could be sitting here in the current company. The 50-year-old one means it's like somebody who's not here yet, right? Or 50 years out would mean that they're not here yet. So that you would hope that the next person, the person after that, would kind of carry on that culture and the things that we're doing. That makes sense, right? Obviously, they need to adapt, and they'll have my book to read. So I think everybody here should be forced to read it, even 50 years from now.
Oh, I would at least at Crum, I would hand it out in orientation.
Yeah,
why not? What do you have to lose, right? Like set the culture. Marc, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for taking the time to write the book, for sharing it with the wider world, not just internally at Crum. I like to call you guys Crum. You guys call yourself C&F, so I should say at C&F.
As long as you call us whatever you want, right?
Perfect. So thank you for sharing it beyond the company. Thank you for coming on the podcast to tell us about it. Truly, for the listeners, if you made it this far into the podcast, go read it, because quite clearly you are a nerd after our own hearts, and it is a really good read. You will learn a lot. It's a very easy read. So yeah, thank you so much for your time today and for writing the book.
Thanks for having me. And I think we're going to put the link in your show notes to the book. So it's free of charge. Anyone who wants to read it, let me know how you like it. And if you want a hard copy, just shoot me a note.
Thank you.